Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre gave us one of literature's most iconic, it's complicated romances. The reserved yet resilient Jane and the brooding Mr. Rochester with his not-so-little secret. Any adaptation of this 1847 classic hinges entirely on the chemistry between its leads. Without that spark, Thornfield Hall might as well burn itself down early. So, which duo nails the Jane-Rochester dynamic best? We've ranked 5 adaptations from least to most favorite. Robert Young's adaptation takes liberties with Bronte's novel, and not always for the better. Key moments are stripped away. Samantha Morton does her best to embody Jane's quiet strength, but without important moments like her reunion with her dying aunt, we're left with a Jane who's lovely but lacking depth. Hines, meanwhile, leans hard into Rochester's temper, so hard that he's less brooding and more borderline aggressive. His outbursts and physical intensity during pivotal moments feel out of sync with the Rochester we know, making him more off-putting than tortured. Even Jane looks like she's questioning her choices. Still, this adaptation raises an interesting thought. Do we love Rochester for his complexity, or are we just forgiving his bad behavior? It's worth watching at least once, if only to make you appreciate other adaptations more. Cary Fukunaga's Jane Eyre is absolutely stunning to look at, with gothic vibes that pull you straight into Northern England. But the downside of cramming Charlotte Bronte's novel into a feature film is losing some of the depth in the characters. The playful back and forth between Jane and Rochester just doesn't come through here. Instead, it feels like a cold guy suddenly confesses his love to someone who barely lets her guard down. The rushed pacing doesn't help either. Their relationship builds to a dramatic climax, but it feels abrupt because so much of the romance is left out. That said, the film is undeniably gorgeous. Fukunaga's gothic aesthetic, paired with Wasikowska and Fassbender's on-screen presence, makes this adaptation worth a watch, even if it doesn't fully capture the novel's magic. Julian Amis's 11-part BBC mini-series ditches sweeping landscapes and dramatic lighting for a stage play vibe, letting the characters do all the heavy lifting. This version leans heavily on Jane's backstory, giving Bessie the maid and Miss Temple their due, as the only people who don't make Jane's childhood a total nightmare. Zella Clark plays Jane as sweet and vulnerable, while Timothy Dalton takes on Rochester with full theatrical flair. He's way too good-looking to fit Bronte's description of a craggy, dark-haired anti-hero, but his performance almost makes you forget. Sure, it's all a bit old-fashioned, and the lack of visual spectacle might turn off modern audiences. But if you love Bronte's novel and care more about strong characters than fancy production, this adaptation gets it right. Franco Zeffirelli's Jane Eyre nails the gloomy vibes of Jane's tough childhood and her time at Thornfield Hall. Charlotte Gainsbourg's grown-up Jane and William Hurt's Mr. Rochester have this tender, quiet connection. You can feel their pain even in their silences. Hurt's Rochester isn't as fiery as in the book, but his subdued, melancholic vibe works surprisingly well alongside Jane's serious nature. This Jane Eyre adaptation is beautifully romantic, even if it flies under the radar because of its serious tone. And the ending, where Jane and Rochester reunite, is everything you'd want. Him standing with his cane, her supporting him, and that long, passionate kiss. It's a sweet and satisfying finish that ties the movie back to the novel in the best way. This 4-part BBC adaptation by Susanna White really nails how Jane Eyre should be told, slow and steady, with enough time to dive into the story and characters. Ruth Wilson in her breakout role as Jane and Toby Stephens as Mr. Rochester are perfectly cast, especially for fans of the book. Most of the script stays true to the novel, which means the characters feel fleshed out and authentic. Stephens' Rochester isn't just the brooding, mysterious guy Jane falls for. He's also playful and unpredictable, exactly like Brontë wrote him. And Wilson's Jane is sharp, clever, and knows how to keep him on his toes.